Hi everyone, in this video we will be discussing the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. We are going to be identifying major causes and effects of the scientific revolution. We will identify the historical origins and characteristics of the free enterprise system. We will explain the development of democratic republican government from the Enlightenment, and we will also explain the political philosophies of some Enlightenment thinkers. By the time that we are done, you will be able to predict how Enlightenment ideas will inspire revolutions in the Americas and in Europe. First, we will discuss what the scientific revolution is. The scientific revolution marks the beginning of modern science. It is also when we introduce the scientific method, the idea that when we make an observation about a problem, we use logic to come up with a hypothesis, then we test that hypothesis and use data to come up with a conclusion. This is the beginning of moving away from relying on just religious explanations and trying to use scientific explanations to explain the world. The scientific revolution is also a period where a lot of new technologies and techniques were developed. These are the causes for the scientific revolution. The Italian Renaissance revived classical learning of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So people started studying the philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists who created a lot of important work during that time period and also began to expand on that information. Because of exploration and trade, navigational problems were encountered and scientists worked to solve those problems. We also see the invention of new instruments that are used to make life easier and also navigating a lot easier. And we see advances in mathematics as well as science because they go hand in hand. The printing press, which had helped spread all kinds of ideas throughout Europe, also spread scientific ideas and make the availability of books a lot cheaper and easier to acquire. Copernicus is an important contributor to the scientific revolution. He is the one who proposes the heliocentric theory that the sun is the center of the universe and not the earth. He also said that the universe was of a staggering size and that earth was no different than any other planet. Galileo is the inventor of the telescope. He uses that instrument to prove Copernicus' theory correct, and he also invented the pendulum, clock, thermometer, and other useful items. He was imprisoned by the Inquisition for his theories on the planets because they went against church teachings. Johannes Kepler proposed 3 laws of planetary motion, so he studied how the planets moved in the universe. For example, he said that planets don't follow a perfectly circular orbit around the sun. They actually have an elliptical orbit that's more oval-shaped. Isaac Newton is the person who defined the force of gravity, and he also proposed that there are 3 laws of motion, one of them being that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. He invented calculus as well. Sir Francis Bacon used inductive reasoning, that is, he used observations and experiments to test his hypotheses, so he is credited with the scientific method. He came up with a system of collecting and analyzing evidence in order to prove his theories correct or incorrect. So these are the effects of the scientific revolution. Because of these new discoveries and advances, we see the rise of a scientific community. That means experts will come together and discuss their ideas and come up with new ones. We also see that people will develop a mechanical view of the universe. They'll begin to see the Earth as a machine, and there are a lot of systems in place that keep this machine going. One example would be the water cycle. In order for it to rain, there needs to be evaporation, and the water collects in the clouds, and when it's heavy enough, it rains. And then after it rains, the evaporation of that water begins again. So it works on a cycle, and if one piece of that machine is broken, then it cannot function anymore. And so people begin to view the world kind of like a mechanic apparatus. And we also begin to see the rise of deism. So these scientists and Enlightenment philosophers weren't necessarily atheists. They still believed in God, but they found a compromise between God and science. They do believe that God created this machine, and that the machine is governed by natural law. So it doesn't mean that they're atheists and that they don't believe that God created the universe. So now we'll get to the Enlightenment thinkers. First, let's define what the Enlightenment is. The Enlightenment is the age where people began to use reason to explain the human and natural worlds. This is a reaction to absolute monarchy and the oppression that people were experiencing under these totalitarian rulers. This is important also because it is going to fuel democratic revolutions in other parts of the world and also lead to religious tolerance. Voltaire was an Enlightenment thinker from France, and he wrote about freedom of speech, religious tolerance, and the separation of church and state, meaning that laws should not dictate what religion the people should practice, and they should not influence their beliefs. He said, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." So even though he disagreed with some opinions, he still respected people's freedom of speech. Mary Wollstonecraft is an English advocate for women's rights. She is one of the first feminists in Europe. She wrote a pamphlet titled "A Vindication of the Rights of Women," and she said, "Strengthen the female mind by enlarging it, and there will be an end to blind obedience." So she was promoting education for women so that they were no longer oppressed by society. Adam Smith is the father of modern economics. We'll talk about him later on in the unit. He proposed laissez-faire. He said that the government should leave the economy alone and not regulate businesses. He wrote a book titled The Wealth of Nations, and that is where Western European countries and countries like the United States get their ideas for the free enterprise system and the capitalist system in the U.S. He said that the real poverty of the poor is the poverty of their aspirations. William Wilberforce is an English abolitionist. Thanks to his efforts, the slave trade was banned in 1807, and eventually slavery was abolished in all of the British territories by 1833. He said, "You may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say you didn't know." John Locke, probably the most influential Enlightenment thinker for Thomas Jefferson, our founding father. He was an English writer of a book titled Two Treatises on Government. In it, he says that people are the source of power. In other words, people allow themselves to be governed, and if they choose, they can change that government. The government's job, according to Locke, is to protect their citizens' God-given rights. And he said, all people have the natural rights, including life, liberty, and property. In other words, nobody can take away your life, nobody can take away your freedom, and no one can take away your stuff. Montesquieu was another French writer, and he wrote a book titled On the Spirit of Laws. In it, he argues for a separation of power in government, similar to what we have in the United States with the 3 branches of government. He said, to become truly great, one has to stand with people, not above them. This is a direct criticism of absolute monarchs who thought they were better than the people they governed. Thomas Hobbes, we've mentioned him before. He's the one who believed that people were naturally born evil. He's an English writer of a book titled Leviathan, and he says that the government must protect people. And without government, according to Locke, our lives would be nasty, brutish, and short. And then we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He's a French writer of The Social Contract. In it, he says that government is an agreement or contract between the ruler and the people. So, in other words, if you recall watching the presidential inauguration, for example, during that inauguration, there is a ceremony where the president takes an oath. In it, he is entering into a contract with the people that he is going to govern. Should he break the rules of that contract, there is a process in place to have him removed and replaced. And that is an idea that was taken from the Enlightenment and then used in the creation of our government. He says that no man has any natural authority over his fellow men, and this is a criticism of the king's claim to divine right. He says that there is no God-given power over people, that everybody is equal. So here are some of the results of the Enlightenment. We see that revolutions are going to take place. It starts in the American colonies, and then it's going to spread to France and to other parts of Europe, and eventually hit the Caribbean and Latin America as well. Thomas Jefferson is inspired by a lot of these ideas, especially those of John Locke, and you can see those embedded in the Declaration of Independence. And also the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights were modeled after a lot of these ideas from the Enlightenment. In our class activity, we're going to analyze some of these documents, and you will be able to see where these ideas come from. That brings us to journal entry number 23. Answer this question. Why do you think Enlightenment ideas inspired revolutions in the Americas and Europe? Give at least 2 specific examples from your notes to support your answer. And one last thing, we'll go over the art and the music of this era. Beethoven, who is a German composer and pianist, was a product of the Enlightenment era. He wrote symphonies and sonatas that are still very popular today. We have Bach, who is another German composer. He composed Baroque pieces. These are very bold and forceful pieces of music that were quite different for the time. And then we have Mozart. He's an Austrian classic composer and a child prodigy. Mozart was writing operas and symphonies when he was just a child, and he also wrote something called requiems that are dark pieces. They inspire very morbid and solemn feelings. And some of the artists from the Romantic era include Goya from Spain. He documented the Peninsular War as he experienced it in Spain. And then we also have Delacroix from France, who painted the images of the French Revolution. Both of these painters painted very emotional, very lifelike, vivid images that have become very popular in modern history. And that brings us to the end of the lecture. If you have any questions, make sure you bring them to class, and thank you for watching.